Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today on Masechtas Moed Katan Daf Yud Gimel, we're going to begin on Yud Beis Mid Beis by the Mishnah at the bottom. The Mishnah says, "Machnas Adam Peroisav Mimnei Hagnavim." A person is able to bring in their fruits on Chol HaMoed because of the fear that thieves are going to steal it. V'shoyla pishtano min hamishra b'shvil shloi toivad. Also, a person is allowed to remove the flax, which would be soaking, because if he would leave it there, it would get ruined. However, a person has to have the intention that he was not really planning on doing this on Chol HaMoed. It just turns out this way. But if you actually had the intention of waiting, and you really had time, then that's not okay. But cool in all these situations, im chivnu, if you intended to work, then yovdu. Says Rashi, she'asul hanis mehen. You're not getting any hana from it. Tana uvavad she'achnisem b'sina b'tach beso. Even though we say you could do these things, but nonetheless it has to be done in a secretive, private manner. Rav Yosef Havilei Kashuri Alenu b'yamma. He had these beams. He brought them during the day. Supposed to do it quietly, which obviously should be done at night, not during the day. So actually, when it comes to these things, this is actually still specific, even though it was done private. It was done during the day. Because at night I'd require another person who boy midkuri the nur avshemilsa, because I would need someone to basically hold up torches and the like, and therefore it would end up causing more problems. More people would know about it, and therefore I did it during the day when I could basically just do this quietly by myself. But shayla pishtana min mishra, so you can remove the flax. So boy min Rabbi Yomi Rabbi Zeraki. So a person was not supposed to have intention. Let's say that he had intention to do these things on Chol Moed, so it's really usher to that person to derive benefit from it now. What happens when Macy dies, and now his children are Yerush? Mahu shiknesu banam achayru. Do we kanas also the children? The imtim salaymer, as we continue in Gimel Aleph. Sarim oizin b'chor kansu b'nai achar mishum di isur deraisa. And when it comes to making a blemish on the ear, it says Rashi, Chatach ma'aznai ma'at kadeshi balmum. You make a blemish on a bechor, so therefore dehe mutulo. Therefore now it's permissible to you. Vasulasos came mishum. The pasuk says beferish mum loyabo. You're not allowed to make a mum. If you did so, kansura banan doloy hena mimenu. You're not allowed to get hana from the bechor. Not only that, v'yimeis in banam nehena mimenu. Also the children. But maybe the reason why we're restricted with this is because of this deraisa. Let's say a person who is also not allowed to do this, selling his servant to an oiv chachavim. On this situation, if he died, we also kanas the child mishum dechol yoyma mafklim mitzvahs, because he was no longer able to do mitzvahs because he's in the hands of an oiv chachavim. Says Rashi, kansura ban v'yitzel cheres to barach min oiv chachavim ein yishol yachol kaifel avodasai. If he runs away, you can't force him to work. V'yimeis ein ban v'chon l'kaifai. Also, the child would not be able to take him back. So hachimai. Gavra kanis rabbanan v'holesa, maybe only the person but not his kids. Maybe is it on the cheftza or the gavra? So we learn like this. It says a sada shinis kavza b'shvius tizaril meitzishvius. So if a person had a field in which they were pulling out, Rashi says nitlu mimenu kaitzim shaba. You remove the thorns so on shvius, so you can plant on Moitzah Shvius. Nitaiva o Nidaira o Tizra o Moitzah Shvius. However, says Rashi, Nizvla, let's say you actually fertilized the field. Or Nidaira, Aide Dir Behema Lazavla Avoidis Karka. You use these animals to do this avoda of fertilizing. Says Rashi, Kol Hanim Rabbanan Inhu, Viafal Pinkain, Kansu Deloy Tizra Moitzah Shvius. Even though it's a din d'Rabbanan, we're not machal between the rest and the Rabban. Even by the Rabban, we're going to kanas. Yamar Rav Yosi Bar Chanina Naktinon that Hativa Umeis Benoy Zara. that when this happens, his children will be able to do so. So we see that we only can ask the person, but not the child. So we're going to also say, when it comes to our situation, even though we wasn't supposed to do it on Chol Moed because he had kavanah for that purpose, and therefore it's us for him, but not for his kids. Rabbi, Naktinan Time Taharaisav. Let's say a person made his items tameh, says Rashi Shalchaverai. So you have to pay that person back because you made his items tameh. Now let's say the person died. We don't knas the child afterwards. So my timer, it's called a hezek shenu nicker. Hezek shenu nicker will shmei hezek. We only knas him, but not his child. Next Mishnah. The person not allowed to purchase these items, a house, slaves, animals, unless you need it for the sake of Chol Moed. If the seller doesn't have what to eat, so therefore you're allowed to engage in this business transaction because that actually is l'tzarech ha'yichel for him. L'tzarech Moed. So let's say you have a worker. So can you hire him? So that you can also hire this person. So all it's coming to do is explain. Says Rashi, we can't derive anything from this. Furthermore, a person allowed to write this document on Chol HaMoed, but let's say you don't believe this person, or the sofer, the scribe, doesn't have what to eat, so you could have him write it, because in that situation you're providing for this person what's Moed. So in fact, this is a raya that, again, when you have someone who cannot afford, doesn't have food, you can give them a job to do, you can give a scribe a job to do, which again shows the great sensitivity that we have, that we're lenient in this situation. That even in a situation where we don't want a person to do work in Erev Pesach, we will allow these three people to work until midday. The people who are engaged in sewing, saparim, barbers, and launders. These individuals, we allow them to do work. So when it comes to sewing, we know that is allowed, at least alidei hedget, to sew in his normal novice way on Chol Moed. Hasaparim v'kaisin shechein haboim b'medinas hayam. As we're going to see next daf, that when it comes to someone who comes from another country and he didn't have a chance to get a haircut, we allow him to get a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Also, if his clothes are not clean because he came from Medinas Hayam. So to a person who came from jail, we allow him to get a haircut and laundry b'chol shemoed. So it's true that a person's allowed to do whatever, hire this person. So kol malachos nami lishtru. So we should allow all malachos. Why are we saying dafka these three? We should say on Erev Pesach, everything is allowed because we mater schar pu'ula on Chol HaMoed. So we should actually learn from here the opposite. Schar pu'ula shein lo ma yochel aser b'chol shemoed, because it was mutter b'chol shemoed. So why are we only saying these three people? Daha ika schar pu'ula shein lo ma yochel. Okay. Okay. Maskabra papa el miata binyan lishtri. We should also allow a person to build a wall. Shechein on Erev Pesach. Shechein kaisel hagoyel or shesarab saiser ubanikadakum ne hasakana. We also said that let's say you have a wall that's bending over, you're allowed to dismantle it and rebuild it on Chol Moed, because otherwise it's a sakana. If we don't allow it, that may fall and hurt someone. So since that's allowed, so therefore we should say that's allowed also on Erev Pesach. So Maskar Rabina Omiyata Lavlor, a sofer lishtri, Shekain Kaisin Kedushi Nashim Gitin the Shivrin. we allow these people to be able to write these things. El Omer Ravashi Moed Arba Aser Karamis. There's two totally different dinim when it comes to Erev Pesach and Chol Moed. Moed, the whole issue of Chol Moed, why we don't do malachas mishum tirchahu. Malkam say the Rabbanan. In the case of financial loss, the Rabbanan are lenient. Arba Aser mishum sarach yomtevu. We only want you to do things which will sarach yomtev. Midin sarach yomtev sharabanan, midin loit sarach yomtev lo sharabanan. Says Rashi. Im came bin lishtri be'erev Pesach the hakaisa hagarish just around mutlav nice b'chol shemayid. So mishum tzarach yamta, says Rashi, shar kikain hani gil umniyos. These three workers, the sulo, v'hu adin im eno ma yoichel dein tzarach yamta gadol mizeh. Then that certainly is no greater need for yamta because this person has no other food. Okay, all right. Let's see if there's any questions yet. Question 1: Tanya chada ma'ilichen mavin kel mebeis ha'uman v'tanya idach ein mavin v'koshken shein ma'ilichen kashen hadadi. Okay, we didn't do that yet. Okay, weiter. So, I don't think we did this yet. Okay. Okay. Here we're going to see it next stop. Okay, so the Mishnah says like this. Ein mafanin mebayis l'bayis. A person is not allowed to empty out or move from and move these items from one house to another on Chol Moed. Avamafanahu l'chatzero. You can remove it to your courtyard. Ein mavin kalim mebeis uman. You can't take kalim that you had in someone's house who's an uman who crafted some keli for you. However, im chayshish lahem. If let's say you're scared that maybe it's going to get stolen, then mafanin l'chatzer acheres. Then you can have it brought into another courtyard. Iva armut reisha in mafanin klal. You can't do it. So Rabbi, seifa tain lebayis shibachatzer. The seif is talking about a house in the chatzer. Vein mavin kel mibeis homan. Amar paba badik one rava. So he examined into this matter. If he understood the teretz, as Rashi says, Tanan it says like this. Ein mavin kalim mebeis ha'uman. They are not allowed to bring kalim from the house of an uman. Or minhu ma'yilichin mavin kalim mebeis uman. It says you are able to. Even if it's not for the tzarech. So we made it a chiluk whether we're talking about chol moed. On chol moed you cannot do so, and on Erev Pesach we do allow it. So let's look at this. Kashan hadadi kan barba aser ma'yilichin mavian. We do allow, and chol hamoyed ein mavian that we do not allow. Okay. Iboy say mahava haba chol shemoyed. The steer of whether you can bring the kalim from the Beis Uman or not, maybe it's not totally on whether it's the Arba Asar, 14th of Nisan, or Chol Moed. Rather, maybe it's a totally different pshat. Haba haba chol shemoyed. Kan b'maminoi kan b'shein maminoi. So what does that mean? Mamino, if you believe and trust the Uman, then in Mavin do letzarchu. If you trust the Uman, there's no reason to be concerned that it's going to get stolen. However, if you don't trust him or you're concerned it's going to get stolen, then you could bring it. So that's a second shot of the difference. It depends on your situation of who this Uman is. As we continue to Gimel Beis, Vosanya, and as proof to this, it says as follows: Mavin, and this is referring to on Chol HaMoed, Kalim Beis Ha'uman, that you are able to do so, not like the first pshat, it's aser. Kegoin kad mebeis hakadar, avakais mebeis hazagog. So you're allowed to take these different kalim, depending on who the uman is. For example, it's a cup from someone who makes glass. Of a lot semer mebeis hatzava. You can't take wool from the house of the person who dies. V'lo kalim mebeis ha'uman. Unless he doesn't have what to eat, you could actually pay him, but you should leave it by the worker. There's don't take it. This is the raya, but if you don't trust the guy, so then you can put it in a house near you. What's going to get stolen over there? Let's see these parentheses. You could bring it to your house privately. Okay, So Taratzda Mavin, you explain the whole notion of bringing it home. Ma'yilichin kasha, how do we understand bringing it there? Diktani in Mavin v'choshkin shein ma'yilichin. Now v'chvorta kadashin mikara. Rather, we have to say shad is like we said before. Kan bar ba'aser kan b'chol shemoyed. Next Mishnah. Mechapin es hakatziois. A person is able to, Rashi says, mechasin, cover up these dates or figs, bikash, with straw. One is allowed to do that on Chol HaMoed. Rabbi Yehuda Omer af mavin. You can even put a extra thick layer of straw over it too. Moichri peiros, a person who's a seller of fruits, ksus, kalim, various garments and clothings and vessels. He's allowed to sell these things, provided that these things are for the sake of Moed. Says Rashi, because people may say, oh, maybe this person doesn't really need it for the Moed. Fine. And then the Mishnah concludes, Hasayadin, those who are engaged in trapping animals, the shushais, the garusais, or a person who's engaged in crushing and various forms of produce, you can do these things. Rabbi Yossi Omer, they were actually strict. We'll see what that means. So, a person is allowed to cover it up with a thin layer. Says Rashi, Shemachaseu ba'anofim meruchakin zemizeh. These branches are far distant from one another. They only have a kisei gomer, not mamish like a cover. Ma'avin, that's what's allowed. Ma'avin asmuche. A thin cover, ma'avin asmuche, to a thicker cover. Says Rashi, Hanafin Samech Zelzeh de Havi Kisui Gomer. The Chadaimer Mechapin Bein Aklushi Ben Asmuche. You can use either thin or thick or a thicker covering. Ma'avin Oisa Oisa Kimin Kri. And you can even make it into like a pile of dates. You can pile it all up, so this way you can much easier cover it together. Tanya mihachi ma'avin oisa oisa kimin kri divi Rabbi Yehuda. Then again, you can make it into this pile. Meicha peres ksusa kel meicha besina b'chu iboyhu. Heinech mir nalatzman shloi havi abdi klal. Is it that they did not do these things at all? They didn't make traps. They didn't crush his produce. O dilma have the havi abdi besina. Maybe they did it. They just did it privately. Tashma meicha peres ksusa kel meicha besina l'saycha moed. Rabbi Yossi Omer, he says that Tagari Tiveria Hinachmir al Atzman, they were strict Shlo Yimaychun Kol Iker. So Beferish, he says that they would not do it at all. Sadi Chayos Oifais, those of Adagan, those who are engaged in trapping wild animals, birds, fish, Sadim Asina, Latzarchamayt. Rav Yossi Omer Sadi Ako Hain, these trappers in Ako Hechmir al Atzman, Shlo Hayit Sadim Kol Iker, they wouldn't trap at all. The Shushe Chilka, those who chopped up wheat, tirgis, vetisni, daishishin mesina. Again, this is like different levels of crushing it into 2 parts, 3 parts, or soaking with water. So they did it again privately. That the shushi tzipara hinachmin al atzman shlo daishishin kolikar. Again, they didn't do this at all. Amarbaya chilka chada. So this is what he says before. Chilka means it's one wheat kernel. Latarti, and you break into 2. Tirgis chadal atlas into 3. Tisni chadal arba, that it's 1 into 4. Fine. Tirgis. Tisni chadal arba. Kiyasar abdimi omer kunsa. What is kunta? Kusemes. It's referring to spelt. That's what chilka is referring to. Meisvei. Chilka, it says chilka, then it says tirgis v'tisni tamein b'chol makim. It says these things are tamei b'chol makim, says Rashi. They're mekabel toma bin mikfarim bin mikrachim. Small or big cities. They're once they become hochshru b'mayim, so then they become they're royal kabel toma. It says Rashi of a chilka. Tameim b'chol makim. When it comes to chilka, it's tummy in all places. I feel b'kfarim. The iyashel him below l'sisa. It's impossible without soaking it. That's why it's tummy because the whole process is he's soaking it, and therefore it has water, and water is one of the yad shachadam. It's one of the liquids in the kabbatoma. This kasher because it became liquid. Liquid touched it. Then all it is just spelt. You didn't do anything to it. It's just talking about just spelt. If that's what it really means, then it shouldn't be makabel tuma. Our answers could go in, for example, demikalpon, that you actually peeled the spelt. If you didn't soak it with water, you wouldn't be able to peel it. That you took off its portions. Says Rashi, actually, it means smooth. That when you take off the pieces, the shell, then it becomes smooth. A person makes a nether that I'm not going to eat dagan, so asr apapul hamitzri. You're also not allowed to eat this bean, which is yavish. If it's moist, it's allowed. You can eat rice. Bechilka v'tirgis v'tisni. Now bishul mamadim echadol atarti echadol atlas echadol arba shopper. It makes sense. The nafgu mataris dagan, because this coarse flour is not called dagan, and therefore that's why it's mutter. Elamandi armer kunta dagan malihu kasha. It doesn't make any sense. Spelt is considered as a dagan. It's one of the 5 grains. So then l'chayra, how can we say it's mutter? A person was neither against it. Kasha. Rav Huna sharhu lahanhu kefuraisa lamezel zvune ki urchayhu b'shuka. So Rav Huna was lenient, and he allowed, as Rashi says, meicher b'samim, those who are spice merchants, to go and to sell their product in the normal way in the marketplace, clearly because this was something in which was itzarach moed. Esverav kahana chanus psucha l'stav. If we have this door which is open to this stub, which is like this middle area, it's not a rishas rabim, so pesach v'noy kadarka, it can be open and closed because it is still pretty private. However, psucha rishas rabim pesachach v'nolachas. If it's open to the rishas rabim, you should at least keep one door closed, so there's some element of sinah in this process. The Erev Yom Tov achar shel Chag moitzi u'ma'ater shukei ha'ir beperus. The shul covered Yom Tov achar. That what they would do is they would take out all the fruits out there, and it would show great covet. So maybe covered Yom Tov Acharon in Shalom, maybe covered Yom Tov Lo. So l'chayra, that is a kasha. So it says o kasha habit peri habit tavlin. It depends on how much fruit or with spice. It says Rashi but tavlin hakol yoidin duletzarach hamoyed. As we said, spices everyone needs it for moyed. V'leika chashada shein ruyin l'skayim. No one's afraid. It's not going to spoil. Hilkach afil b'far hesia mutter, and therefore, because of that, we're mater you to sell these things even b'far hesia, even in the shuk. However, when it comes to other things, peros, in that situation, so again, it's v'leich hashad shein ruin l'skayim. It's pumfakert. Because these spices actually would spoil quickly, it's more likely the person is going to use it. However, if it's something which has a longer shelf life, there we're not going to allow you to do it, but sell it before hesia, because then there's a greater likelihood that perhaps you're not doing l'tzarach moyed. Third parak, the elu megalchen b'moyed. So we're going to see in next daf the people that are allowed to get haircuts. Okay, we'll stop here. Let's see a couple more questions. Eza davar mutter limcho kedarkai. What are you allowed to sell normally? I feel before hesia b'moed mahatam. The answer is tavlin, spices. Kivan de'ein ruin l'skayim, because it doesn't last. Leich shada jein sarach moed. There's no doubt it's definitely being sold for the sake of the moed. TA4. Be'elu fanim shol havi kelim mebesa umen b'chol hamoyed. These are the ways in which a person is allowed to bring kalim on Chol HaMoed. So let's see what he wants. I actually wrote this correctly. If it's L'tzarech Yomtiv, or Enu Moicher Ma Yoichel V'hu Enu Maminu V'enu Makom Samach Latzniya. So if, let's say, again, you're concerned it's going to get stolen, In that situation, we're going to be makel, and you're allowed to move it. TB2. El Chamisha Kanasois. This is a hard question. These are the 5 Kanasois, Nizkar Behem Hanidoin, that the Nidoin mentioned on this daf, in Kansu B'no Acharov. It says, Kasav Chol Pachlis Arba. So, of course, one was the question that we had. The person who used the paris for Chol HaMoed, he ended up doing this avoda, this malacha, which he had the kavanah to do then, so you can ask him. We end up saying we don't can ask his son. The second thing we talked about was the din of we mentioned about a bechor. The person makes a mum on that, so then it also will apply to the son. We talked about a person who ends up doing certain avoda on Shvius, whether or not that's on Moed Shvius it can be done. The child is allowed that. We mentioned if a person is matama something of his friend, who we say that he dies, so he doesn't have to pay, because that's called a hezek she'eno nicker. So those are 4, and the 5th one is Meicher Abdul Akum. If you sold an Eved to an Akum, and then the person dies, the son also doesn't have rights to that slave. Adkan.